Hey everybody, this is JDGaming back today with a new deck profile to introduce to you guys. This is a new variant of the Hand Artifact Traptrix deck that I've reworked into heroic Artifact Lilith Traptrix, also known as H.A.L.T. And considering trap cards are the order of the day, I think it is a very fitting name because that's exactly what trap cards do. They halt your opponent, haha. But basically, this is a twist on the deck that's made possible thanks to the new Lilith, Lady of Lament we received in the Lair of Darkness structure deck. Lets us access a lot of key trap cards, normal trap cards like Artifact Sanctum, like Reckless Greed, and some other dumb shenanigan cards. And yeah, this is definitely a build of H.A.T that I have not seen around before. It's just a lot of fun to play, got a lot of interesting new twists to it, so if this was the type of deck you enjoyed seeing in the past, maybe you'll enjoy seeing this. So we're going to do a let's build of this since it is a new theme. Basically, I will go through and explain all my choices in here, why they're in here, just some tips and tricks on how you use this deck and how it was built, and then alphabetical profiles at the end of the video as always. But if you just want to see that, I do have a timestamp in the description box or in the comments down below. It's pinned to the top as always for your convenience. Probably a table of contents in this video as well, just so you could see the different components. Feel free to check out any of those sections, and then if you have any questions remaining, remember the middle section does go through and explain how the deck functions. So without further ado, let's build H.A.L.T. The first step in any deck creation is to ensure you have the core theme established. And in our alphabet soup known as H.A.L.T, we're playing a bunch of archetypes that end up coming together in some sort of cohesive strategy, and they just happen to spell out the word H.A.L.T, which actually is perfect for this type of a trap strategy. Normally, this is a variation of H.A.T, so it would be Handz Artifact Traptrix. I'm not playing the Handz, and I'll get into more detail later in the video, but for now, it's important to notice it is an Artifact Traptrix deck. What do these cards do? Sanctum gets you an artifact once per turn, and then those have control abilities on your opponent, and if they try to kill this with something, then you flip this, you can kill one of your opponent's cards because of the Sanctum dying, and still chain it and get your card. So very powerful if your opponent's playing back row removal willy-nilly. Yeah, Cosmic Cyclone's a thing now, but it's still a pretty interesting thing to keep in mind. Main thing is you can access Artifact Scythe to shut down your opponent's entire turn with this card, potentially. And then 𝗵𝗎𝖆 just gives you access to things like Bottomless Trap Hole for simple 1-for-1 removal or better, and that helps soften your opponent's field. You know, you're already limiting their options with this, and then you get rid of the one monster that could kill your board. Now you have like 1 or 2 monsters you can actually attack with. So basically that's how this deck plays. It's a war of attrition. You shut down your opponent's options, decrease their attack force, and then attack over their weakened field or just into their empty field. That's how you win with this deck. Nicely, the new Lilith, Lady of Lament, ties these two themes pretty nicely together. This is a tour guide target, so Dark level 3 Fiend, 2000 attack, who unfortunately gets, have down to 1000 if she's normal summoned, but the quick effect is what you're using her for. So you could tribute a dark monster to reveal 3 normal traps from your deck, and then your opponent, basically like Power Tool Dragon, is forced to randomly choose one to set to your field, and you put the others back, and you can only use this effect of Lilith once per turn. So the couple things I want to mention with that. First, your opponent doesn't see what you add. That means you could play mind games with this deck because you could choose different trap cards, various combinations, and make your opponent not know what to play around, and that's really, really cool. That's always what I love doing with 𝗵𝗎𝖆. I always used to go, oh, I have Bottomless in my hand, so I'll go summon 𝗵𝗎𝖆, choose a different trap hole, and then set Bottomless, and then they think I set that card that I showed them, but it's Bottomless, and they weren't ready to play around such a versatile card. So just like that, you could do some really dumb mind games with Lilith, where you show your opponent certain cards, they think they have to play around that, but then you set something else. Whether you end up setting something else entirely or set something first, maybe you choose something else, but it's just a lot of different things you can do with that. So I like that. That's more just like the fun over the top meta stuff that I like doing with Lilith. But then the second thing is, and the biggest thing that makes this deck work, this card searches your Artifact Sanctum. That's what you wanted in a H.A.T deck or Artifact deck for the longest time now, and we're able to do that, which is really cool. Biggest problem with Lilith, other than the fact that she's just tributing herself in this deck because there aren't any other darks really, is the fact that she tributes herself and there is no Lilith on the field. So you have these 6 monsters for attacking and nothing else. So that's something we have to keep in mind. We're going to need some more attack power for the rest of this deck to ensure we can actually win, because traps are awesome, shut down your opponent, but you can't win with just traps unless they're actually, trap monsters, and this deck plays none of those. So just something to keep in mind as we go forward. And then we are playing the Artifact engine, so we're playing 2 copies of Scythe, as I mentioned, to shut down our opponent's plays, and 1 Moral Attack. Reason for Moral Attack is with 6 of these things, half of the time your opponent goes first. So in that situation, you want to make sure that you have something to deal with your opponent's established board, because you have so much access to the Sanctum, and Moral Attack does a decent job at doing that. But the nice thing with the Sanctum is, it does provide a monster that's 21 attack or greater, 22 for the Scythe rather, excuse me, and then you're able to go ahead and beat down your opponent with those cards quite nicely. Then I mentioned Bottomless. This is your nice catch-all, kind of like a throwaway removal for 1/1 or better. Swallows up entire pendulum summons, rescue rabbit plays, whatever your opponent may be doing, and then you're able to just go ahead and deal with most threats, even Darkest Diabolos, cards that would come back from the grave or whatever. Just get rid of those. But in instances you can't deal with those, I like playing Floodgate, mainly because this is a very versatile trap card. Hits everything. Yeah, it puts that out of commission where it's face down. But again, in a tribute deck like Lair of Darkness, just hit them with Bottomless. In other decks, you can Floodgate them, put them out of commission, and we play some tech cards later that actually take advantage of Floodgate. So really all you care about is you play a card that's really generic. The other cards like, Time Space and whatnot, like Bottomless is pretty much going to do the same thing anyway. Like I suppose you could play Time Space and whatever. You could consider the new Network Trap Hole coming out soon if your metagame is so saturated with special summons from the grave and deck that you would want to do that. But I don't know, I think Floodgate's just best. You could deal with simple normal summons, you could do a lot of dumb things with this card, so yeah, that's why we're playing that. And then some other normal trap cards that we play in addition to these, I play 2 copies of Back to the Front and 2 copies of Dimensional Barrier. And the reason for this is Lilith is able to search out both of these. Back to the Front ties these themes together because you get an extra use out of artifacts for another turn of shutdown. You get Myrmilio back for her MST effect, and you get Lilith back, who can then go attack as a 2000, and then when she's threatened or during your end phase, just tribute her off for another card, like another Sanctum or whatever. So all around works with everything in the deck, but the reason we play 2 is because you don't want this turn 1 most of the time. You need something in the grave for this to be useful, and unless you sacked Lilith specifically, you're not going to want it. So I just play the 2 copies because that way you're a little less likely to draw into it. You can still search it 2/3 of the time with Lilith, which is nice, and essentially Back to the Front serves as extra copies of Sanctum. So you Sanctum turn 1 for a Scythe, then you use Scythe as a material for a play next turn, and you Lilith into Back to the Front to then go and then bring back your artifact. So you do that again. But in that situation, any copies that you don't have of Back to the Front for the triplicate for Lilith, you just go and add in extra copies of Sanctum and you could essentially do the same thing. Back to the Front obviously has a little more versatility in being able to hit all this stuff, and some of the other cards we'll get to later as well. But you don't need this thing as a guaranteed 3 of, and that's why I just play the 2. Still have a good shot of drawing it, still really useful, but it kind of doubles as extra copies of some of these other cards. Similarly, 𝕮𝖆𝖇𝑑 we play 2 copies of because you don't have to guarantee you get this because you have this. Both of these cards are able to shut down your opponent's plays for a turn, and the trade-off is Sanctum gets you a monster, which is so crucial in this deck to make sure you can actually win by having attackers. 𝕮𝖆𝑇𝑑 doesn't do that, but the trade-off is it's powerful enough to play as a normal trap that's searched off of Lilith because it can shut down monster types from being summoned or from using their effects if they're already on the board. So the duality there of being able to stop your opponent from introducing cards and being able to deal with an established board is what makes 𝕮𝖆𝑇𝑑 really worthwhile in my opinion, and that's why I play just the 2 copies, more like a searchable tech here. Don't have to max out on those in my opinion, just because you don't necessarily need to do anything with those, but maybe in like a side you could side in the 3rd 𝕮𝖆𝑇𝑑 if that's really good or something in that matchup. That's what I do there. And then because you have so many searchable throwaway type of trap cards that limit your opponent's moves, I like playing the 3 Solemn Strike and the 1 Solemn Judgment. Warning could go in here as well, but just because of life points with this guy and then space reasons, I ended up not adding Warning. But essentially the reason we chose Strike is it's versatile. It stops your opponent's special summons, it stops their monster effects, whether they're on the field or not, whether they're established or not. And that's really good because this lets you deal with things no matter whether you're going first or second. So that's really crucial. And the reason we play these is basically when you bottomless your opponent's key play, or you shut them down with Sanctum or whatever, then they're really limited in what they can do. And then you follow up with one of these when they make a play of desperation and they can't fight back anymore. They have an empty field, you kill them, and the next turn is the idea, or at least do massive damage and put them on like a 2-turn clock. So that's the way you play these cards. You play your other traps first, then you play this when you have to. and when your opponent hopefully has no other options left, and then that'll help you win the game. And that is especially important for Solemn Judgment, because you can see here, if you play this first and pay 4k, you can't pay the 45 needed for all 3 of these if you happen to draw into them. And we'll get to it in a bit. The draw power in this deck is going to make it so you could probably see 2 of these things fairly consistently. So with Solemn Judgment, the way you play it is in one of 2 main ways. So you play it when your opponent is behind. So you squash their last resort play. They can't fight back. You win. Awesome. Or if you're losing, you play this to make sure your play sticks so that you're able to fight back and then turn the tide of the game, regain control, maybe win from there. So that's the 2 main ways you want to play Judgment. You could, I suppose, play it as another like 1-for-1 removal if it's late enough game and you're making your opponent top deck or something. But yeah, I don't know. Just keep those 2 goals in mind for Solemn Judgment, and it'll put in a lot more work for you than if you were to just play it willy-nilly. I mentioned earlier that I'm not playing the hands in this deck, and by that I meant the Fire Hand and Ice Hand. These guys were traditionally played in the H.A.T deck, the Handz Artifact Traptrix, and they have 2 really big functions that were awesome. So these guys are floaters, so if they die from destruction in any way and are sent to the graveyard, they summon the other copy after killing a card on their opponent's field. So Ice Hand kills spells and traps, and then Fire Hand kills monsters, and then they replace themselves with the other copy. So you basically go normal this, crash into something, kill a spell or trap, summon this, crash into something, kill a monster, summon another of this, and you could keep going. And that does 2 big things. First, it makes it so that you're able to deal with your opponent's established field, because these guys can kill your opponent's cards. That's really good, and it's something that we're going to want to keep in mind as we move forward in this deck. The second thing is these guys replace themselves as floaters by going into each other, and that means you always have a monster to attack or defend with, which again, we only play 6 monsters right now because we're not playing the hands, and that's something we want to make sure we have as well. Enough steam so that we can continue fighting, because creatures are what are going to win this game for us, and we got to make sure we have enough of those. And the reason I don't play the hands mainly is because they're too slow. You don't want to sit around on this thing. I mean, you could go and crash, but some decks don't even play back row, so then it's like you can't play the Ice Hand effectively. It's just not been great ever since people dropped back row in a lot of their strategies. Yeah, you can kill their field spell, but then it's like, I don't know. Hands are okay, you could side them or something, but instead of playing the hands, I just want to replicate those 2 effects. I want the ability to deal with established boards, and I want some staying power for my own plays so that I can actually win the game. The way I start off with that is 3 copies of my Heroic Challenger Assault Halberd. So this is something I use all the time in my floater extra special deck. Basically, it starred this guy, Traptrix Myrmilio, and 𝗿𝗿𝖊𝖊𝖓𝗍, all monsters that give you free pluses, and that makes it so you can make Xyz and Synchro plays without losing cards, and then you just keep fighting your opponent down with +1 monsters every turn. This card is awesome for a lot of reasons. So if you go second, it's a Cyber Dragon, and then if he does damage to your opponent, which he does piercing with 1800 attack, so you're going to do damage a lot with this guy, you could search a heroic monster from your deck and add it to your hand. So usually you're going to add another copy of this. You could in other decks consider like Thousand Blades, but in this deck you don't need that card as a combo piece or anything. It's too slow to be useful out of a combo. It's too pointless in this strategy. So whole point is you drop this, you could attack a monster, and then you could search this, and if you still haven't normaled, because let's say you didn't draw Lilith or a Myrmilio, just drop this, and then main phase 2 you can go and make an Xyz play to help make a better board that controls your opponent's situation. So that's one of the ways you could use it. You can obviously use it alongside Lilith or Myrmilio to make plays as well. And the fact that it's just like this self-contained 3-card engine where you draw one of these, it searches out another copy, it makes a special summon so you can make a play out of these guys. I really love this. 18 beater with piercing is a solid body for you to attack with, so all around it just solves all of this deck's problems, giving us a monster that we can attack with safely, allowing us to go second and make plays. Just a really good card all around. I do play a Rhoda to help search it, because if you think about it, this is our main monster here other than those other guys, and so if you don't have Lilith or Myrmilio, you want to fetch these. Rhoda helps you do that, but if you already have them, since they search each other, the Rhoda just makes you clog them, and that's why I play one 𝗍𝗿𝖊𝖓𝖑. So I was originally playing more of these, because the idea was you play them with your hand traps, and you'd be able to go and, Black Rose Dragon if you go second, and that works. So you do these cards, though. And the problem with 𝗍𝗿𝗓𝖓𝖓 is since it goes to defense, it's a lousy attacker. It needs to be with some other monster in your hand already to be useful, whereas Assault Halberd's good even if you don't draw any other monsters. You just draw Assault Halberd and a bunch of traps. That's still pretty decent. So 𝕮𝗓𝖊𝖓𝖓 is really in here as just a tech. With Rhoda, you essentially have 2 copies for drawing, but only 1 copy where it probably won't be dead because of that. And then the halberds, you essentially have 4 copies to draw into, but you know, Rhoda can fetch that instead. So I really like this package. It helps you make plays if you're going second. It just solves a lot of your deck's problems. I did mention the hand traps, and we're playing 2 and 2 of Ghost Ogre and Ash Blossom. And the reason I'm playing these, not Veiler or anything, you know, usually I'm like, you don't have the Ash Blossoms, go play the Veilers, that works. In this deck though, you want the level 3s because 𝗮𝗊𝖓𝖓 and the Heroic Challenger can turn into Black Rose off of these, which helps you decimate your opponent's board, then you set your traps, and then your opponent has to fight back with fewer resources. Or you turn an artifact into an Omega with these, and then that guy is so hard to kill that your opponent's going to have a lot of difficulty getting through your traps and a monster that just won't die. So really do want the level 3 tuners to be able to do that. And then hand traps specifically, because if you're going second, you're in trouble a lot of times, right? Or at least you have an uphill battle to fight. So going first, you have so many ways to shut out your opponent. You're probably just going to win. If you go second, you have to deal with, you know, these boards your opponent puts together. This helps stop a lot of what your opponent's able to do. And the reason I play 2 and 2 and not 3 and 1 is because I was originally playing 3 of these and 2 of these. For space reasons, I needed to cut one of them, and I was like, I could cut the Ghost Ogre, but Ghost Ogre, don't forget, she's a psychic. She activates from the field. So much like in my psychic deck I talk about, if you teleport her or if you revive her or whatever, she works from the field just like from the hand. So you can actually combo this with Back to the Front, which you could search off of Lilith and then snipe your opponent's card during their turn. And if they don't trigger it, then you can go ahead and synchro with this thing in the following turn. So very powerful card. I wanted to make sure Ghost Ogre had representation. Honestly, if you don't have Ash Blossoms, you could go and invest in a 3rd Ghost Ogre and then a teleport, an emergency teleport, and you're able to basically have 4 copies, just like Rhoda, for drawing purposes of level 3 tuner monsters. That'll help make, you know, the exact same thing essentially. You still have access to Ghost Ogre as a hand trap. You can play teleport as kind of an actual trap card, flip that to get Ghost Ogre and snipe during your opponent's turn as well. Ash Blossom's still in here at 2 because it's so powerful. If you do have it, you definitely want to be playing it right now. But yeah, 2 and 2 for balance, just because Ghost Ogre has synergy in this deck that Ash Blossom kind of lacks because her effect does not work from the field. But yeah, that's what I play there. And then for the last 2 cards for getting rid of things, I play 2 Eater of Millions. So the idea here is this is able to swallow up your opponent's monsters, put them face down where they can't be accessed anymore, and you can summon this thing off of your extra deck toolbox. And the toolbox is key here. This isn't a spam deck. It's not a synchrocentric or hyperlink deck. You don't need all your extra deck cards. They're just toolbox cards as options. And so you could easily get rid of 5 of those things to drop one of these guys. Since it's a special, you could still normal your 𝗲𝗡𝗅 or your Lilith or whatever, still make all your plays. And then since this gets rid of all of your opponent's biggest problem monsters, you can then attack with your other guys, either killing the rest of the guys or attacking directly to score a damage. And I really like that with Eater of Millions. Plus, because this effect works once per turn during both turns, if your opponent attacks you into this, you know, usually they'll sacrifice a monster, throw it into this, and then attack with another guy and kill it. But you have so many traps in this deck that you can make it so your opponent has a really hard time getting rid of this guy through battle. They basically have to use some other form of removal. And that's really cool because he baits out a lot of removal as just a free special summon because of how annoying he is. And then that allows your other monsters to, you know, stick around and make sure they get in the damage that they need to. So all around really a fantastic card. Don't forget you can only use it for link material. You can't tribute it or use it as a synchro or Xyz or fusion material, but you can get around that with 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, where you turn this into 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏, and then that card can be used as like tribute fodder for artifacts that are dead in your hand or whatever, if you want to just do more damage that way. So just little things to keep in mind with Eater of Millions. And then finally, some last few cards for support here. I like playing 2 Pot of Duality. Yes, you know, I've loved Duality forever here. Honestly, I guess quick story, the way I got this Duality was I bought a lot of those collector tins, like Duelist Pack Yusei 3 or something, collector tins that had 1 𝕮𝖊𝖓 pack and 3 of those Duelist packs. And I bought like a case of those things at my Target, just like 10 to 15 individual tins, $10 a piece. Got one of these things, and back then Duality was a $100 card, so in terms of value, I got that. But yeah, it's just like this crazy adventure. I was like, I for whatever reason back then I wasn't buying anything. I was just like, I'm gonna get this. I wasn't gonna buy stuff online, so I was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna get things locally. I got this locally, and it was just a fun story. Would I do that again? Not really, but the memory still sticks around with me. I love Pot of Duality, and I was always finding a way to make this work. But enough of a break here. To get back into why Duality is so good in this deck, your normal summoning 𝗲𝗏𝗍, or your Lilith, or any of your other plays, setting your Artifact Sanctum, setting your traps. So Duality fits seamlessly into this. You don't care about the fact that you can't special summon, because 𝕮𝗊𝖓𝗍𝗲 is the only thing that's like pure special summon. Even Halberd, you can normal summon, attack, deal damage, search another copy, and then plus off of it. So really, the only thing that gets shut down is that 𝕮𝗊𝗓𝗍 again. And then every once in a while, if you are desperately needing to make a special summon play for actually advancing the game state, that's why just 2, you don't want to clog into these or anything. But why not Card of Demise? Because that's a big question everyone asks whenever they see Duality. It's like, well, they have the same conditions. Well, it's because this particular build really needs those hand traps. Not only do those hand traps help you fight if you're going second to make sure that you can, stop your opponent enough so that your traps matter when you go second, but those hand traps have to be used as synchro material off of your guys to make sure you have big beaters that stick around and can inflict the damage necessary to win the game. And in that case, you can't really afford to just throw away your hand of monsters, and that's really why I chose not to play the Card of Demise. Yeah, you can just build the deck differently, play Card of Demise, draw a lot of cards, and overwhelm your opponent. That is a viable way. But I wanted this to be more like the traditional H.A.T deck. That's what I'm used to. That's the deck I played. That's what I really enjoyed playing back in the day. And to kind of replicate it, Duality fits nicely. Card of Demise is a little too off-the-walls extreme on that end. And I do like how the hand traps are able to supplement this deck for both of their qualities, as hand traps and as tuner monsters. So that's why Duality, and no Card of Demise. And then we also can't play Pot of Desires. I tried it out. I love the +1 you get. I love the instant draw too. The problem with it though is when it rips apart 10 cards of your deck, this deck ends up running out of steam. Like, you run out of monsters, you cannot win the game. It just was losing me more games than winning. And so what I decided to do is cut those out and play 3 Reckless Greed. And this looks really dumb, but hear me out on this. This card is actually one of my favorite additions to this deck. I'm just so glad I refound this guy from way back in the day. So essentially, the way you play Reckless is draw 2 cards, skip your next 2 draw phases, and those 2 draw phases don't stack. What that means is if I play 2 Reckless Greeds, I get to draw 4, and I only skip my next 2 draw phases, because that's how it's worded, that I don't skip 4. So that's really cool, because that means now I can go activate Reckless Greed during my turn. So I draw during my draw phase, Reckless Greed for 2 more cards, and if any of those 3 cards I saw another Reckless Greed, a Duality to help me get Reckless Greed, or a Lilith, which I guess also could be searched off Duality as well, lots of different ways I can now set Reckless Greed, and then during the opponent's turn, flip that to draw 2 more. But since the 2 draw phases off of this first Reckless haven't started yet because it's not my turn, this Reckless Greed will still only count those 2 same turns, and so I don't lose anything. So you can already see between Duality, between 3 Reckless Greeds, between Lilith, you can easily create artificially scenarios where you get double Reckless Greed, and the draw 4 you get that turn is just enough momentum to win you the game. Like, that's more than Card of Demise, and you have no restrictions other than you're done for 2 turns. Now, with the caveat, Reckless Greed is still a dangerous card to just play as that 1 card alone if you have no other play or no way to guarantee you'll get that Reckless. And I like thinking of it as a Lair of Darkness. You wouldn't take a hand of 5 cards with a lure, no dark monsters, and a lure to try and draw a dark monster, because if you don't see it in those 2 cards, your hand is gone and you just lost the game, right? Reckless Greed is kind of like that, where if you play this thing when you don't need it, it can lose you the game just because you lose your 2 draw phases, and it could lock you out of any maneuverability. It basically limits your options, and that's a problem. But because you have this as a normal trap card and it is searchable with Lilith, a lot of games you're going to open up between these guys, you're going to have your Artifact Sanctum already, or a D barrier ready. And in that case, your Lilith turns into a Reckless Greed, and if you already had a Reckless Greed or draw into one in the next few turns, you basically can, again, create the situation where you double Reckless, and that momentum swing helps you win the game just because of the sheer number of cards that you draw. On top of that, Reckless Greed, in the situation where, let's say you drew the 2 cards, you didn't quite win right there, well, 2 turns isn't impossible to get through because, again, 2 D barriers, 3 Sanctums, 3 Liliths to help get stuff, though I guess the Lilith could get the Reckless Greed at that point. You have 5 cards that can just shut down your opponent's turn, and in that situation, Reckless Greed is able to, just not be a problem because you can shut down one of your opponent's turns, maybe you have some other back row or another shutdown for a second turn, and then you're free and you're able to fight back. You can also go for something like 𝗿𝗍𝖑𝖊𝗑 and then, stall for the 2 turns while you can't draw. Lots of different things you're able to do in this deck. Reckless Greed ends up being much more beneficial than problematic in the long run if you know how to play it. I admit, when I was first testing this deck out with Reckless, I ended up losing games because of this thing, just like I was losing because of Pot of Desires running the deck down out of Steam. But if you play this card carefully, and basically, it's kind of like the Judgments, right? If you play this when you need it or when you can maximize your advantage, it just does wonders for you because of Lilith. And so I really like this 5-card draw package here. It's very powerful. And just the fact that there are no restrictions on Reckless other than the credit 2 draw phases is pretty darn good. And then the last thing, as just a tech, 1 blowout card in Scapegoat. If you draw it, great. You get to go summon 4 tokens, and then that lets you go for 𝗿𝗏𝐼𝗍𝗔, and then under that go Link Spider, and then go and turn 𝗿𝗏𝐼𝗍𝗔 and a token into Proxy Dragon. Sack your last token for 𝗿𝗏𝐼𝗍𝗔, and then from here, you can either go Borreload Dragon, monster can't be targeted, so it's a pretty good monster there. Steal your opponent's guys, do a lot of damage, whatever. So that's an option. Or if you already have a monster on the field because of Artifact Sanctum, or you summon one that turn, you can just go for 𝗣𝗍𝖑𝖊𝖓, which is really cool because it lets you summon artifacts from your hand to deal damage, or you can mulligan those extra artifacts away to use with Sanctums. You can fix your hand of dead traps or whatever. Lots of things you're able to do with 𝗣𝗍𝖑𝖊𝖓. So not mandatory in this deck. It's not like a critical piece, but I really do like it. Scapegoat basically serves as this blowout card where if you draw it, great, you get to do this. And if you don't draw it, the rest of your deck is still fine. The whole point of this is, since you're waiting on a trap card to shut down your opponent for a turn anyway before you fight back into a weakened game state, where your opponent's committed some cards, lost value in them, and then has a weak or a non-existent board, you might as well just set the Scapegoat along with this stuff, flip this, and then that huge swing in momentum, you go for the 𝗣𝗍𝖑𝖓 or Borreload Dragon when your opponent's down, and then you're able to just win. So this card's really powerful for just creating those situations. Not necessary, that's why we just play the 1. The 2 cards, if you were to play 2 copies of this, you are in danger of dead drawing it, not opening with 2 per se, but between Recklesses, the dualities and stuff, you have a lot of deck thinning, and you don't want to accumulate into 2 Scapegoat because of how slow it is. The rest of the deck's already, kind of like a slow paced deck anyway, so just play the 1 copy. If you draw it, awesome. If you don't, at least you're not in a situation where you double drew and you're in trouble. So that's why I do that. Again, I talked about these 5 Link monsters for the extra. We play those guys, and then on top of that, we play Destruction Synchro, a stick-around monster, Destruction Synchro, and a stick-around monster at levels 7 and 8. So essentially, Goblinberg, I already talked about, you go for Black Rose, bomb the field. You could do a similar thing with Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend and an Artifact monster, get rid of your opponent's established field, and then attack with these guys. But if you don't need to kill the stuff, then you just go for these 2. Omega, obviously, you just dodge with, and then, he's hard to kill, so he's very good value to turn 2 monsters into 1 as a solid attacker who won't go down. And then Samurai Destroyer is similar, so 2600 attack are Mateys effects, so your opponent can't respond, can't activate their effects of monsters killed or anything, and if he's sent to the graveyard because of your opponent, you get to revive it. Just a really powerful monster that's worth turning your 2 monsters into 1. That's the big theme here. You don't want to minus yourself into oblivion when you're playing this type of a deck, because you have to make sure every monster counts. And these 2 synchros, I think in particular, are really good at sticking around, being worthwhile to play, and that's why we do that. And then the Xyz monsters, basically I end up playing 1 Abyss Dweller, because some Grave decks, you play this and then you just win because of that, especially with the traps to shut them down as well. Karen Gorgon's interesting because it's kind of like Stardust Dragon. You protect your back row from Cosmic Cyclone or whatever. You can interrupt some of your opponent's plays, so if they're playing a combo deck that requires them to target their own cards, you can actually decide how they play their deck by targeting other stuff as long as it's appropriate. So just a dumb card, plus 2450 makes it one of the better beaters in this deck. �11𝗍𝗑𝐽 I already mentioned quite a lot, so attacking, he's a wrecking ball, he's hard to kill, so that's good. He sticks around. In defense, you draw into traps over a few turns, and then you can squash your opponent's like one link monster they'd summon to try and get rid of this guy while in defense, so that's pretty good. And then on top of that, you know, if you're in a reckless greed scenario, you could just summon this thing, sit on it, and then wait out the 2 turns. So very powerful card in this deck, definitely mandatory to play, just because it just works with everything you're trying to do with the trap cards. Tornado Dragon unlocks your artifacts if you draw them, so it makes it so that you're able to, you know, get extra mileage out of your artifacts, get, you know, those monsters onto the field, pop cards, or shut down your opponent for the turn, and then you have multiple monsters now with more than 2,000 attack to actually play the game. And then, you know, you could also, I guess, combo it or stop your opponent's combos by killing their field spells and whatnot. So that's a pretty good card all around. And then finally, I like playing for the last 2 slots the Utopia package. So the idea here is you don't, again, need any specific extra deck monsters in this deck, like �11𝗍𝗑𝐽 probably, Tornado Dragon probably, and then just some of the synchro monsters. But the Xyz monsters, a lot of them are tech. I like playing these just because when you go for the Utopia the Lightning, he's able to kill things and prevent effects. He has the ability to pump up to 5,000 to do a lot of damage. He's just a worthwhile monster to turn your 2 monsters into. You won't regret going into him most of the time, and he solves a lot of your problems. So that's why he's in there. If you watched the video in its entirety, thanks. Hopefully you enjoyed seeing this new creation of mine as much as I did putting this thing together, because I've just loved the H.A.T deck ever since it was popular and originated back in like, what, 2014 now? So it's been fun playing around with these themes, and Lilith finally makes it come back together. So I'm very, very happy with how things are turning out. We'll go through the main deck first. So we end up playing 1 Moral Tech and 2 Artifact Scythe. Then double Ash Blossom, double Eater of Millions, double Ghost Ogre, 1 Ggoblinberg, triple Heroic Challenger Assault Halberd, triple Lilith, Lady of Lament, and triple Traptrix Myrmilio. That's 19 monsters, and it's actually kind of a low monster count if you consider a lot of those guys aren't attackers, but, you know, I go and explain why that is in the rest of the profile. We have double Duality, a single Rhoda, and a Scapegoat for just 4 spells, so that ends up being, what, 23 cards so far, so 17 normal traps coming up here. We have 3 Artifact Scythe, double Back to the Front, double Bottomless Trap Hole, double Dimensional Barrier, a Floodgate Trap Hole, triple Reckless Greed, Solemn Judgment, and triple Solemn Strike for a 40-card main deck. And then for our extra deck, most of this is just a toolbox. You don't need to have, you know, these specific ones, but, you know, more insight on that in the rest of the video. But essentially we play a Link Spider and a Link Kuriboh at Link 1, Proxy Dragon at 2, Borreload Dragon and Saryuja Skuldread at 4. And then for synchros, we play 2 level 7s in Black Rose Dragon and Samurai Destroyer, and 2 level 8s in Psyframe Lord Omega and Scarlet Red Dragon Archfiend. And then from there, we play some generic rank 4, so we play Abyss Dweller and Karen Gorgon, we play 41 �11𝗍𝗑𝐽 and Tornado Dragon, and then we play the Utopia the Lightning package for a 15-card extra deck. That's the end of this video, but if you'd like to see more of this series, you can click the annotation on the right, or you can see the last video I did by clicking the one on the left. If you enjoyed, I encourage you guys to leave a like and share it with others you think who may enjoy it as well. And if you'd really like to see more updates, then subscribe to JDGaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JDGaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.